Bruce was really ahead of his time. So he called me up and said, I want to do a movie with a fight scene that everyone will remember called Return of the Dragon. He said, would you come over?
He was the fiercest name in martial arts, the one who could stop a man mid-attack with a single movement. But behind Bruce Lee's legendary on-screen presence was a shocking truth.
Wheel kicking people and like jumping side kicking people in the face. You'd be like, whoa. Bruce Lee and then Chuck Norris was how I got into martial arts.
Many actors refused to work with him and refused to say why. For decades, Chuck Norris stayed quiet, following the example of his fellow martial art experts. But now, at 85, he finally breaks silence on why many actors refused to work with Bruce Lee.
Bruce was a very rare type of individual. Exercise, conditioning was his life. And
why fear, not fame, kept people away from the dragon. Meeting a legend. It was the summer of 1966, in the bustling yet insular circles of elite martial arts in Los Angeles, when Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee crossed paths for the very first time. On the surface, they couldn't have seemed more different. Norris, a soft-spoken but formidable karate champion, had already claimed numerous titles, including the prestigious professional middleweight karate champion, a title he would hold for 6 consecutive years. Lee, meanwhile, was still navigating the early days of his Hollywood breakthrough, working as Kato on the Green Hornet, yet quietly brewing a storm that would redefine the global perception of martial arts. Their introduction wasn't some high-profile showdown hyped by the media or orchestrated for spectacle. It was far more subtle, an organic convergence of two minds destined to reshape the martial arts world. They met through mutual acquaintances in the martial arts community, drawn to each other not by competition, but by an insatiable curiosity and a hunger for growth. Rather than test their strength in public arenas, the two legends chose privacy. Behind closed doors, in quiet dojos, or even in the calm of private homes, they trained together, often for hours on end. No cameras, no audience, just sweat, silence, and shared passion. Their sessions were more than sparring. They were symposia of technique and philosophy. Norris, rooted in the structured world of Tang Soo Do and American karate, brought to the table an arsenal of high-kicking techniques, precise, powerful, and rarely seen in traditional Chinese systems. His sidekicks were devastating, his roundhouse kicks crisp and economical. These techniques fascinated Lee, who had always believed in adapting and absorbing what was useful from any system. In exchange, Lee exposed Norris to a whirlwind of fluid, unpredictable motion, his Jeet Kune Do still in its embryonic stages, but already potent. His philosophy was revolutionary, intercepting attacks rather than waiting to block them, using the most direct route, striking not just with hands, but with intellect. Lee's hand speed was otherworldly, his footwork unpredictable, and his ability to read his opponent's next move bordered on the clairvoyant. But more than the physical, it was the mental exchange that defined their bond. They would sit for hours, discussing the limitations of rigid styles, the philosophy behind combat, the psychology of the fighter. Norris was struck by Lee's emphasis on formlessness, on the idea that a true martial artist must adapt like water, taking the shape of any challenge, flowing through resistance rather than meeting it head-on. But martial arts techniques were not the only topic these two legends discussed behind closed doors. At the time, Bruce Lee had already noticed that Hollywood was trying to cast him to the side. Many actors failed to reply to his invitations to castings, while others flat out refused to work with him. Hollywood executives insisted on casting him in roles that kept him caged. He was losing hope of ever doing more, becoming more. But in Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee found a loyal friend, someone to turn to when in need, both on and off screen. What emerged from their time together wasn't rivalry, it was alchemy. They had ignited something in each other, and though they would eventually go on to become icons in vastly different ways, their meeting in 1966 was a quiet detonation, one that forever altered the path of martial arts in the West. So when Bruce Lee decided to go all in with a movie he would both direct and star in, he had no doubts about the person he wanted to cast as his antagonist. And so, Way of the Dragon was born, and the world witnessed something that would change the very definition of martial arts fights. The Colosseum clash, more than a fight. By 1972, Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris's relationship had evolved from friendly sparring partners to something far more profound, artistic collaborators who were about to etch their names into cinematic history. This evolution culminated in The Way of the Dragon, Bruce Lee's directorial debut, where he made a bold creative decision. He would cast Chuck Norris, then a 6-time world karate champion, as his climactic on-screen adversary. The setting? None other than the legendary Roman Colosseum, a venue as dramatic and storied as the showdown itself. But here's where reality and legend begin to blur. The Colosseum sequence wasn't sanctioned. They had no filming permits, no safety nets, no time for mistakes. To bring the vision to life, Lee and his crew secretly bribed local guards to grant them an hour, just 60 precious minutes, to shoot what would become the most iconic martial arts fight scene ever committed to film. There was no margin for error, and yet, in that stolen window of opportunity, something timeless was created. There were no stunt doubles, no smoke and mirrors. What you see on screen is exactly what happened. Two masters of their craft, testing not only their physical limits, but their storytelling ability. Long, unbroken takes showcased their skills in real time. Lee's blinding speed against Norris's raw, grounded power. The rhythm was operatic, a dance of breath, sweat, and controlled violence. And the silence of the ancient amphitheater only magnified every strike, every fall, every glance. But beyond the physicality, the choreography carried a narrative weight rarely seen in action films. This wasn't just a fight, it was a philosophical confrontation. Lee's character represented fluidity, adaptability, and Eastern philosophy. Norris's Colt was the embodiment of rigidity, tradition, and brute strength. As the duel progressed, Lee gradually dismantled Norris's form, not just physically, but ideologically, showing the triumph of flexibility over force, of self-expression over mechanical repetition. But unlike many actors who had been lucky enough to share a set with Bruce Lee and had walked away seething with rage after being humiliated, Chuck Norris lost the fight with a smile on his face. What makes The Way of the Dragon duel endure isn't just its technical brilliance, but its soul. It wasn't a flashy spectacle. It was a stripped-down meditation on combat, filmed in a 2,000-year-old arena built for blood sport, now echoing with a different kind of clash, one that transcended violence and approached art. For Bruce Lee, this was more than a final fight in a movie. It was a statement, a masterwork, a chance to fuse philosophy with fists, cinema with combat, and legacy with legend. And in Chuck Norris, he found the perfect counterbalance, not a villain, but a worthy rival, a man who, like the Colosseum itself, could stand tall in the face of greatness, even in defeat. A legend's candid confession. It's not often that a fighter of Chuck Norris's caliber makes such an admission. A 6-time undefeated world karate champion, martial arts Hall of Famer, and Hollywood icon, Norris has spent decades at the pinnacle of physical discipline. But when the name Bruce Lee comes up, there's a shift in his tone, less of competition and more of reverence. If it came down to a real fight, Norris once confessed, his voice calm and unwavering, Bruce would have beaten me. It's a statement that stunned fans around the world, and not just because of who was saying it, but because of how deeply it contradicted the usual bravado of martial arts legends. But Norris wasn't exaggerating. He was speaking from experience. The two had sparred regularly during the late 1960s, when both were rising stars in the martial arts world. At first, their styles clashed like night and day. Norris's traditional background in Tang Soo Do and karate emphasized powerful kicks, control, and structure. Lee, still developing what would eventually become Jeet Kune Do, was all speed and improvisation, an unorthodox whirlwind of explosive hand techniques and lightning reflexes. In our earliest sessions, I could outkick him, Norris recalled. That was my specialty. But Bruce, he didn't need to win the first round, he just needed to watch. Bruce Lee was a student in the truest sense. Every sparring session was a classroom. He would analyze movement patterns, identify timing gaps, and then dismantle them, not by brute force, but by using an opponent's strengths against them. Within weeks, the balance of power began to shift. Lee began incorporating Norris's own techniques into his fighting, but with a twist. He'd use Norris's signature roundhouse kicks as setups, fake-outs, even misdirections. He'd re-engineer them, shortening the delivery, combining them with hand traps, disguising them behind blinding speed. But it wasn't just the physical side of Bruce Lee that made him unbeatable. According to Norris, it was his mind, sharp, strategic, and singularly focused. Bruce didn't fight to score points, Norris said. He fought like his life depended on it. That mentality, to survive, to dominate, to never hesitate, gave Lee an edge that few opponents could handle. He was never fighting you. He was fighting everything that stood between him and victory. Fear, pain, ego. It all dissolved when Bruce entered combat mode. And unlike many fighters, he didn't rely on routines. There was no blueprint to follow. One day he was a boxer, the next, a fencer, the next, a street brawler. He merged styles and philosophies with ease, making him dangerously unpredictable. Norris would later describe it as trying to spar with a ghost who thinks 10 steps ahead. Despite the hypothetical nature of the who would win question, there was never any real rivalry between the two. In fact, they deeply respected each other. Norris played opposite Lee in The Way of the Dragon, a cinematic masterpiece that featured one of the most iconic fight scenes in film history.
You were in one of Bruce Lee's great movies.
Return of the Dragon.
Return of the Dragon.
Yeah.
And this is a famous fight scene.
Filmed in Rome's Colosseum, no less. But despite the fame and fortune, Bruce Lee never got to reap the fruits of his labor. Today, martial arts enthusiasts would give anything for a minute on a sparring ring with the dragon. But back in the day, actors consistently refused to work with him, undermining his influence in Hollywood and backing him into the corner of typecasted stand-ins. Bruce Lee was a legend in the making, and yet many refused to associate with him. Why? Decades after Lee's death, Chuck Norris would finally answer this burning question once and for all. Why Hollywood feared him. Despite Bruce Lee's cinematic brilliance, his on-screen charisma, and his revolutionary martial artistry, a strange pattern emerged in Hollywood. Many actors, even established stars, flat out refused to work with him. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a scheduling issue, or maybe even creative differences. But those who knew the inner workings of Hollywood whispered a more unsettling truth. Bruce Lee had a presence that transcended performance. On set, he didn't just act, he radiated mastery. He didn't demand attention, he earned it. His confidence was not the manufactured kind that Hollywood often rewards, but the quiet, lethal certainty of someone who had trained, bled, and pushed himself beyond ordinary human limits.
We'll show him Chinese boxing.
Yeah, Chinese boxing.
He was the real thing, and that's what terrified them. In an industry built on illusion, Bruce Lee was unshakably authentic. Every movement, every stare, every line he delivered came from a place of deep, lived experience, not rehearsal. He was the warrior, and for actors who had made careers pretending to be one, that was unsettling. His excellence didn't just outshine others, it exposed them. There were hushed murmurs behind closed doors, dismissals whispered at parties or in backlots, branding him too much. I heard people say he was a fraud, Norris declared. But here's the thing. Those words came from the wrong crowd. Norris explained that those whispers never came from anyone who had trained with Lee, sparred with him, or stood face-to-face with him in a studio or dojo. No, those people didn't whisper. They respected him. Even those who didn't like him feared him. The skeptics stayed on the sidelines, lobbing stones from a distance, unwilling to test their doubts in the ring. Bruce Lee represented something that made many uncomfortable. Unfiltered truth. He didn't need stunt doubles. He didn't need slow motion to look fast. He didn't require wires to fly. His body, his mind, and his spirit were already operating at a level most couldn't fake, let alone match. And that made him dangerous in Hollywood. Not because he was combative or arrogant, but because he was undeniable. He disrupted the system without trying to. His very existence was a challenge to the norm. Lee's authenticity was his greatest threat to the insecure, to those who had built empires on facades. He was the embodiment of reality, and in a world powered by illusion, that was deeply intimidating. Bruce Lee didn't just shake up Hollywood, he shook the very foundations of martial arts itself. While many clung to ancient disciplines and rigid forms passed down through generations, Lee boldly rejected that rigidity. He saw flaws in tradition, especially when tradition became dogma. And so, he created something of his own. Jeet Kune Do, the way of the intercepting fist. It was not just a style, it was a philosophy, a rebellion, a blueprint for evolution. Where other martial arts systems were bound by form and ceremony, Lee's Jeet Kune Do was fluid, responsive, and alive. He borrowed techniques from boxing, fencing, judo, and even street brawling. If it worked, it stayed. If it didn't, no matter how ancient or revered, it was cast aside. This heretical approach rocked the traditional martial arts world to its core. Purists were outraged. They called him disrespectful, a rule breaker, a renegade. But Bruce wasn't trying to insult their traditions. He was trying to transcend them. Chuck Norris, one of Lee's few worthy contemporaries, played a crucial role in this evolutionary process. He introduced Bruce to advanced high-kick techniques, something not emphasized in Lee's foundational style of Wing Chun, which favored close-range combat and low-line kicks. But Bruce, ever the sponge, mastered the techniques in record time, adapting them with frightening precision. It was a turning point. It proved a fundamental truth of Lee's philosophy. Knowledge has no hierarchy when truth is the goal. He didn't care where the technique came from. He cared only whether it worked, whether it could end a fight quickly and efficiently. In this way, Jeet Kune Do wasn't a rejection of martial arts. It was the evolution of it. Lee's approach predicted the rise of modern mixed martial arts decades before it became a global phenomenon. While others were arguing over lineage, Bruce was building a style for the real world, adaptable, instinctive, devastating. But that forward-thinking philosophy clashed with the gatekeepers of both Hollywood and traditional martial arts. He wasn't just breaking their rules, he was exposing their limitations. The critics who never fought. Despite the reverence he earned behind the scenes, Bruce Lee was no stranger to criticism, loud, biting criticism that came mostly from those who had never faced him. They dismissed him as a movie star, a flashy technician more concerned with spectacle than substance. Some even said he was a fraud, someone who choreographed his fights to look impressive but avoided real confrontation. But the irony was painful and telling. Not one of these critics ever stepped up. Not one dared to spar. As Chuck Norris, one of Bruce's most respected peers, once said bluntly, the people who criticized Bruce were always the ones who never fought him. Real fighters knew better. Joe Louis, one of America's most feared full-contact karate champions, trained under Bruce and credited him with unlocking a new level of consciousness in his approach to combat. Louis was already elite, but with Bruce, he became surgical. He began to understand angles, rhythm, and deception. It wasn't just about kicking or punching harder. It was about timing your opponent's breath, reading their next move through the faintest twitch in their shoulder. Mike Stone, another heavyweight in the competitive circuit, once confessed that Bruce's vision of martial arts altered his entire worldview. Lee taught that combat was not confined to a set of rules, not to karate, not to boxing, not to any one style. He believed that adhering to tradition at the cost of evolution was the death of effectiveness. That's what made him dangerous. Not just his speed, not just his strength, but his mind. A mind that challenged the very foundations of martial orthodoxy. Bruce Lee never needed validation from trophies or belts. His proof was in his movement, in his precision, in the way trained fighters would freeze under his presence. He moved like water, yes, but water under pressure, water with purpose. Whether it was a back alley, a small dojo, or a bustling film set, Bruce controlled the moment. Every moment. On screen, he was electrifying. Off screen, he was undeniable. The critics would talk, but the fighters knew. And while many actors refused to work with the Dragon, those who personally knew Bruce Lee would do anything to share a screen with him. So when Lee offered Chuck Norris the role of his antagonist in his movie, Norris didn't even think twice about accepting. And the rest, as they say, is history. The legacy they built together. The Way of the Dragon was never meant to change the world, at least not at first. Bruce Lee conceived it as a passion project, something personal, tailored for Asian audiences, and filmed with a shoestring budget in Rome. But fate had bigger plans. What began as a niche martial arts film exploded into a global phenomenon. And while the dazzling fight choreography and exotic European backdrops captured audiences' attention, it was something more elemental that kept them watching, something unspoken. It was the electrifying chemistry between two titans,
Chinese boxing.
Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. On paper, they were opposites. Bruce, the iconoclastic philosopher warrior from Hong Kong, fluid and philosophical in his movements. Chuck, the disciplined American karate champion, grounded and mechanical in his strikes. But when they stepped onto that ancient Roman stage for their legendary duel in the Colosseum, they didn't just perform a fight scene, they immortalized a moment. Their every movement was steeped in mutual respect, every blow a conversation, every pause a reflection of admiration rather than animosity. It was less of a battle and more of a ballet, an epic demonstration that martial arts could be both brutal and beautiful. Behind the scenes, their bond ran deeper than the screen allowed. When Bruce Lee casted Chuck Norris, he knew he would not refuse to work with him like many other Hollywood actors. Norris understood how powerful, innovative, and strong Lee was, and behaved accordingly. He brought with him decades of competitive experience, a champion's mindset, and an eagerness to learn from Lee's cinematic vision. Their friendship, built on sweat, sparring, and shared philosophy, was one of the few in Hollywood untouched by ego. Together, they didn't just choreograph a fight, they choreographed a movement. The Way of the Dragon wasn't just a film, it was a gateway. It launched martial arts from dimly lit dojos and niche theaters into the blinding spotlight of global cinema. Bruce Lee opened that door with raw charisma and revolutionary ideas. Chuck Norris helped keep it open, carrying the discipline into the West and inspiring generations with his stoic power and relentless drive. Their legacy isn't measured in ticket sales or trophies. It's measured in every kid who tied a black belt around their waist after watching that film. It's seen in every modern action movie that dares to make fights poetic rather than chaotic. And it's felt in the quiet reverence every martial artist has for that moment, when two legends meet not as enemies, but as equals. Chuck's final word on Bruce Lee. After decades of measured silence, of letting the world speak in whispers and speculation, now at 85, Chuck Norris breaks silence on why actors refuse to work with Bruce Lee, and what he said didn't just echo across martial arts circles. It sent shockwaves through Hollywood, through history, and through the hearts of every person who ever wondered what it was like to stand beside a legend.
You want to fight? I'll take you on.
This wasn't a cheap soundbite. It wasn't a headline grab. It was a truth that had been burning beneath the surface for years, a truth too heavy to speak until now. Actors didn't refuse to work with Bruce Lee because he was difficult. They didn't avoid him because of ego or arrogance. The truth was far more humbling and far more awe-inspiring. They refused because they couldn't keep up. Bruce Lee's very presence on a set didn't just command attention. It dismantled illusions. His skill, his discipline, his intensity, they weren't performative. They were real, tangible, intimidating. Standing next to Bruce Lee was like standing beside a flame. Beautiful, mesmerizing, but dangerous if you weren't forged in the same fire. He exposed the fragility of the facade, the kind of truth that makes men tremble, not out of fear, but out of the realization that they were standing next to something transcendent. He didn't just perform martial arts, Chuck said. He was a martial artist. He didn't act, he lived it, breathed it. And when you saw that in person, you either rose to the occasion or you ran. Chuck Norris doesn't speak with envy. He doesn't speak with regret. He speaks as one of the few who stood toe-to-toe with Bruce Lee and lived to carry the memory, with reverence, with clarity, with something close to love. Have you ever met someone so talented, their very presence changed the way you saw yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video with us and catch you in the next one.